Hello, everyone. My name is Emma Hayek, and I am a senior Slate strategist with the Slate optimization team at Carnegie. And this is one of a few videos within our Slate demo series where we'll be teaching you some of our favorite how-tos of Slate. Today, we're going to discuss some of my favorite tips for making Slate as easy as possible for new users. I first began working in Slate as an admissions counselor, and I remember being confused by things that I consider second nature now, like which field to use in a query, especially when choosing between scopes, where to find fields within custom tabs, or to see the information on a dashboard. As a Slate captain or more experienced Slate user, there are a few things that we can do to make it easier for novice Slate users to navigate and get used to all of the information that's available within Slate. The first tip that I have is to make sure that you are using record dashboards. I've worked with a couple of institutions recently that are not using person and app scoped dashboards. So if we look at this example student record, this is going to be the part in the red box here. So this can be a very simple thing to set up in Slate. I would highly recommend it if you're not currently using this. It's kind of my North Star on a student's record. It's going to give me my snapshot of pieces of information that I would need to know about that student immediately upon landing on their student record. So you get to control all of the information that shows within the red box here. You get to customize how it shows. You can do lots of fancy things here. But the first step is just to have that information show there. So typically, a lot of institutions like to see things like student type, staff assigned, entry term, but get feedback from your team on what information they would want to see when they land on a student record. What things might currently show if you are already using these that might be confusing, or that they feel is missing or getting in the way. We want to make sure that it's as clean as possible. We don't want to have too much information here. So making sure we have the highlights included on that record dashboard. Now, my 1B here is to optimize the dashboards. So I am going to include a little bit of a disclaimer before I get into this one. So most of the time, the things that I'm going to talk about with optimizing dashboards involves making it more dynamic for the front end user, which inherently does typically make it more complicated on the back end. So this means that the maintenance and the troubleshooting does require a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of liquid markup, likely configurable joins, existence fields, probably a basic understanding of HTML and CSS. However, provided that you do have that knowledge on your Slate team, I do think that the benefits greatly outweigh any additional work that optimizing the dashboards might cause. So one of the examples of what I consider optimizing the dashboard would be using logic to display fields that might have a couple of different scopes. So if we have an entry term field for our person scope, as well as the application scope, that is certainly an area where newer Slate users get confused as to which scope of field they should be paying attention to. So we could just put them on the dashboard as that merge field. Where it starts to get confusing for staff is if there's conflicting information. If I inquired and said I was interested in fall 23, but I ended up applying spring 24, making sure that the staff knows what the significance of those fields are can be a challenge sometimes. So one way to address this is show different scopes based off of where the student is at in the funnel. So if the student is an inquiry or a prospect, show their person scoped major and entry term fields. Obviously, there could be other fields that apply to this as well, but those are the two that typically come to mind. However, if the student has applied, maybe I want to show their rank 1 application scoped major and entry term fields. So if I have not yet applied, I'm going to actually be showing a different field to the user, but they might not even know it. There are some caveats to consider with this. So you definitely need to have some institutional knowledge to know that this is set up how you want it to be set up. So for example, would we actually want to only show rank 1 applications? Or are we an institution that allows multiple applications per round? So maybe we are a graduate program and students can apply to up to 3 different programs. So in that case, we want to show just any applications that are in an active round. Maybe we only allow 1 application per round, and rank 1 does make sense. Another question to consider is if you're a shared instance, would this make sense for someone who applied as an undergraduate student but is now a graduate inquiry? Would we want to be relying on the existence of an undergraduate application? So we might need some separate logic for those records. You can see how this can get complicated pretty quickly. But one thing that I'll point out is if you're having to think through these pieces of logic and these steps to decide which field to use to create the dashboard, so is your front-end user when they're trying to determine which field to look at when they're interacting with that student. So if we are wanting to use that first example of logic, if they're an inquiry or a prospect, show their person scoped. If they're an applicant, show their app scoped. There's a couple of different ways to set this up. So option number 1 is creating a subquery export that's essentially going to show us the field that we would want to show. So all within this subquery export is the logic, choosing between our person scoped and our app scoped fields. So this is using a formula. The formula is coalesce, which is essentially like an if statement. So it's essentially like saying, if there is an app scoped major, if app scoped major exists, show it, else show the person scoped major. So the coalesce formula can be helpful in a lot of different areas. Note that here we are looking at the existence of the app scoped major rather than using the person status of applicant, because in theory, someone could have started an application, but they haven't actually filled out that app scoped major field yet. So we would see a null value on the dashboard, and we'd actually be seeing less information than showing that person scoped major, assuming that that exists. Another option is to have 2 different merge fields in your dashboard. One is the person scoped, one is the app scoped, and just use your liquid markup within the dashboard itself to choose which field you're going to show. Both are going to give you the same result. It's largely about which option you are most comfortable with. So here we have our person scoped intended app type, and we have our app scoped rank 1 application app type. And on the right-hand side, you can see that liquid markup to show the different merge fields based off of whether or not that app type exists or not. One of the things I do like about this option with the liquid markup is that you're able to actually change the label on that field. So if you do have users that are familiar with the different scopes of the fields, they can see those subtle name changes to say, oh, it says intended applicant type instead of applicant type. So that's their cue that that is in fact the person scoped field instead of the app scoped field. Another way to help users know which fields to use is to create a field reference query within your instance. So this essentially means taking a configurable joins field scoped query. So it would be configurable joins, then system, then field. I like to filter to only show the active fields. And then I typically like to include the things that are shown on here. So name, category, scope, type, and then field notes. I do also like to customize the export for the scope to show person for null values, because out of the box, that field is going to be null for anything that's person scoped. Not everyone's going to know that, so I do like to configure that null value to show person. Assuming that you have some notes within your fields, which I highly recommend, this is where you can give additional context to explain what that field is. So our first example at the top, the claim account date, we might not necessarily know what that means. The field notes are going to tell us that this is the date that they received their Slate University credentials. So it gives me more context as to what that field is. Our bottom 2 examples are named the same, but they're different scopes. Once again, this might be requiring a little bit more data structure understanding than newer Slate users will have. So we have the context that the person scoped field is essentially the self-reported version of this answer, whereas the relation scoped field is the kind of verified by HR version of this answer. So we know that that person has verified their relation faculty or staff status. Another dashboard opportunity is within the inbox. This could actually be the exact same dashboard that you're using on your main person dashboard. So it could be incredibly easy to implement this. Maybe you already have that main record dashboard, but you're just not using it in the inbox. It's going to save your staff some clicks to get to the basic information that they would need to see about that student. One common request within the inbox is an easy way to CC parent email addresses. So this example here specifically shows a dictionary subquery export that's showing any relationship information for certain relationship types. So we've excluded siblings from this list, but any parents or legal guardians that exist on that student record are going to show in the inbox dashboard. So it makes it very easy to CC any of those relations. If you're collecting things like whether or not you can communicate with that relation, all of this is information that you're able to use with configurable joins queries. Which brings me to my caveat about using configurable joins queries in the inbox dashboard. So there is a little bit of a quirk to getting this set up correctly. So the key to getting this dashboard to show within the inbox is having a Slate template library message inbox query within your system folder shared with other users and set up with the system key of dashboard. The existence of this query with this scope in this folder is the key to having this appear. If you want to use configurable joins, however, you'll actually need another query with that configurable joins base. Very likely a person base, but you might have some other use cases for a different CJ base. The configurable joins query is where you will build out your dashboard in the way that you would typically think about it. You're adding your merge fields, you're adding your source code to actually put those merge fields on the dashboard. That's all taking place on the configurable joins query. If something happens to that Slate template library query, if it gets deleted or moved out of that system folder, even if that CJ query exists, it's not going to show in your inbox anymore. So I like to name it as clear as you possibly can, that this is a necessary query, but not actually where you are updating that inbox information. So within the description here, we actually link to the CJ inbox query to try to make it as clear as possible, since this isn't necessarily the most intuitive thing that we would have to have set up with inbox. While we are in inbox, one thing that can save a lot of people time is using our inbox snippets. So we'll link to the knowledge base article. It's very helpful with getting set up here. But this is sometimes an easy win for institutions to either save time or streamline messaging or both. So this can be really helpful for responses that are used frequently. So responding to our free t-shirt requests, or how does scholarship awarding work at your institution? Why would I want to study this specific program at your institution? As well as for information that might change over time. So say you're a rolling admissions institution, to have a shared snippet that all of your staff members can get to guarantees that whatever deadline is being shown in that snippet is the current version of that snippet. So you can always share these with only view permissions. So you can specify that maybe the admission staff has access to use the snippet, but not to edit it. Maybe it's only your admin that are able to edit certain permission or certain snippets. You can also create your personal snippets as well. So maybe you have some phrasing that you use yourself, or it just doesn't apply to any other roles. They do not have to be shared. It's just like copy and paste, essentially. It's just a much more organized way to keep that all in Slate. So if we take a look here, this is what those snippets would look like within the inbox. So we can search the snippets. We can either search by what the snippet title is or the content within the snippet. So if your list gets pretty long, it's still very easy to find those different pieces of information. And you can always tweak what that snippet says once you've copied and pasted it in there, add additional context, add multiple snippets, so on and so forth. Even if your institution isn't using Inbox, though, I still highly recommend that you put some snippets in there because they'll also show up on the right-hand side when you are emailing directly from a student record. So they're both controlled via Inbox snippets. Makes it really easy to reach out to students with similar messaging, but still allowing for that personalization. You didn't think that I would get through this without talking about query libraries. If you know anything about me, I cannot stop talking about query libraries. They are one of the most valuable tools in Slate. Our Slate squad uses them all day, every day. We try to encourage as many institutions to use them for multiple reasons. This can be many different conversations off of this. So this is a very high level overview of query libraries. It's absolutely worth exploring, but the too long didn't read version is, first, if you're not using query libraries, you should be. But essentially it allows you to make your own configurable joins, exports, filters, and joins to use instance-wide, and you can name them whatever you want, which means that you can name them something that is very intuitive even for a new Slate user. So let's take a peek at how these are actually used. So we would build our query library, and then we're able to use them anywhere that we can use configurable joins, but they're named very specifically what they are. So you can see admitted for at least 7 days. That is a very descriptive filter. Querying on decisions can be kind of complicated within configurable joins, especially if you're not familiar with the data structure behind it. So to be able to very easily pull in admitted for 7 days, or someone who is admitted but hasn't yet visited campus, or maybe someone who has done a virtual event but not been to campus. These are all things that can be pre-built within the query library. So if someone is looking to build out a query using these, they don't really need to understand the CJ behind it, the field scope, anything like that. They just need to be able to pull in those pre-built exports and filters. If you're interested in learning more about this, there is plenty of information out there. I am so obsessed with Query Library. I did present about it at Slate Summit last year. You can find the same content on a webinar on our website if you are interested. My last tip for you all is to provide ongoing Slate training. Ongoing Slate training is not just for Slate captains. It's really necessary for all skill levels within Slate, partially because there's always new features being rolled out. There are new, more efficient ways to do things. There's new functionality that we haven't had before. So one being that Slate is always growing and changing. Another reason is that sometimes there are things that you only have to do once a year. So it might be something that you knew how to do 10 months ago, but now that we've come back to it, we maybe need to refresh exactly what the steps are to set this up correctly. I highly recommend holding a regular meeting that is dedicated for non-Slate captains, for less of the technical team, to learn about, ask questions about, troubleshoot within Slate, and share their helpful tips and tricks with each other. I think as Slate captains, it's really easy for us to take a lot of these helpful things for granted. But for a new Slate user, some of these small wins can make a huge difference in their confidence and their efficiency within Slate. Thank you for joining me for one of our Slate demo series episodes. Once again, my name is Emma Hayek. I'm a senior Slate strategist. We would love to work with you or chat with you, so feel free to get in touch with me. My email address is ehayek@carnegiehighered.com, or you can reach out to us through the request for information form on our website, carnegiehighered.com. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.